Hi everyone, Scorp here, back with another top 10 list for Duelist the Roses. I'm continuing on the effect monsters. This time I'm going over the archetype specific cards, the cards that I probably wouldn't play outside of the archetype, or they're just so interchangeable cards that they just didn't quite make the other effect monsters list, and probably if they didn't make either of these two lists, they're probably not going to see much play in most decks. So there are a couple other effect monsters that might see play, but this is pretty much the rest of the really good ones. So first up, I'm kind of cheating here for number 10. There's a lot of cards in number 10 because they all basically do the same thing. So number 10, Snakehair, Fiend's Hand, Dream Clown, Swordsman from a Foreign Land, and then I'm going to scroll down here, Blast Sphere, Blast Juggler, and let's see here, and yeah, that's it, Blast Sphere and Blast Juggler. So all of those cards do the same thing. This card's a Widespread Ruin on a stick. This one is too, both of them on Destruction. And then scrolling back up here, Snakehair, on Destruction, it basically destroys an opponent monster, except slightly better unless they have a Curse Breaker or Magic Neutralization field. Although for a lot of beat sticks, you basically killed it, because it's going to lose all of its extra power from all of its equips. Fiend's Hand destroys on Destruction. Dream Clown on flip, permanent spellbinding, basically destruction. Swordsman from a Foreign Land, it destroys the opponent when it's destroyed. All of these cards do the same thing. Each of them act the same way, but I probably only play them within my archetype. The only one I might consider putting outside of my archetype is either Maneater Bug or Swordsman from a Foreign Land, just because they're so cheap, and B, they're just destruction effects, and I might put Maneater Bug over Swordsman from a Foreign Land if I want the flip effect version versus the defense position version. Both of them have their downsides. Maneater Bug is weak to Dark Piercing Light and open opponent card, whereas Swordsman from a Foreign Land, I mean, if you get Gorgon's Eye, that thing's getting stuck in attack mode, and it's going to get attacked over, and you're probably going to get one-shotted, because it only has 250 attack. So that's why these are all at number 10. They basically just destroy one opponent card. Blast Sphere and Blast Juggler, most of the time they're going to destroy one card. And sometimes they destroy your own cards if you're not careful, so definitely watch out for them. That's why they're basically at the same level. They're not any better than these other cards unless they're used really well. But if your opponent plays around them, they tend to end up being the exact same as these other cards. So I put all of those at number 10, just because if I'm playing a zombie deck, probably both of these are going in. If I'm playing a warrior deck, both of these are going in. If I'm playing a machine deck, Blast Sphere and Blast Juggler are going in. If I'm playing an insect deck, Maneater Bug's going in. But they're probably not going to see much play other than maybe a 1-for-1 deck, in which case I'd probably put every single one of them in, and then play some major anti-Gorgon Eye tech so that I don't ever get Gorgon's Eye. And then these cards would literally just go 1-for-1 with all your opponent's threats, and then you just win the game with one more of these than your opponent had cards. Okay, so next up, so done with the cheating. At number 9 we have Maneater. This card is on here as and it's not in the group of 10, because this card quite often your opponent can't play around, and probably won't play around this card. You just completely forget this card exists, and then it goes and blows up an entire forest terrain, and this card's flip effect goes 5-for-1. or more. I mean, I've seen this card on Weevil's field. I've just flipped it face up and destroyed 10 of his cards. And then, I mean, that's pretty much just game winning. So that's why this card's on the list. It's hard to play around that, especially with Arsenal Bugs running around and Forest running, and you can just turn the entire field into Forest, and then this card just is a dark hole. So, and a dark hole for 2 summoning cost and a deck cost of 19. Last I checked, that's pretty good. And next up, at number 8, we have Gate Dig. A card that I probably should play more, because it fixes your summoning power problems. I purposely build almost all of my decks to not need this card, because I build almost all of my decks to be 1 and 2 star creatures, and then a card like this just doesn't see any use because I'm always sitting at 4 or 5 summoning power every turn, and I've just played a monster every turn. Whereas this card probably fits itself into some of the heavier decks, like the Dark Spellcasters, like the dragons, like light dragons, like Blue Eyes decks, and also machine decks like to play cards like this. So definitely a stronger. This is definitely a really strong effect. It can be quite a game-changing effect. You can play a card and then flip this, and then the next turn you get to play another like 12 cost creature. Also works with something like Solomon's Law Book. Definitely a card to, if you're having summoning power issues all of the time, you can definitely put 1 or 2 of these in the deck, and that can help sort it out. And definitely it also goes in Beasts. So I didn't include it in the entire list of really good effect monsters because it's just too situational for a lot of decks. But it also works in Beast decks, so that's why it's here. And also some other archetype decks really want this card, whereas other archetypal decks, like Light Sorcerers for instance, they're never going to need a card like this. So that's why it's here. And it's kind of high up on the list. It's not near the top, but it's usable, and I just don't like the effect that much because I build my deck so that I don't need this card. So, next up. Now, next up, this is probably going to be a surprising card at number... it's a surprising card at number 7. Hourglass of Courage. This card, when it's destroyed, you lose 1,000 life points, which 1,000 life points is nothing. It doesn't matter, it just makes it so that your opponent's Ruryoku suck more. But this card is... it's just a plus 1,000 attack and defense for all of your creatures. So it's a plus 4,000 buff to your team. Not bad, it's not amazing, but you definitely need this card in a deck like Fairies, where you're struggling to get every last power up. So that's why this card is really good in Fairies. So this card is definitely could see some decent play because of that. And I like this card in Fairies, and you might be able to throw it into some other decks, but I think there's some better options a lot of the time. But in a deck that really needs that last bit of, that last extra equip or that last extra thing to increase your creature's power, Hourglass of Courage is pretty nice. Next, at number 6 we have Laughing Flower. Now, here's probably another card that you guys just don't even think exists, right next to Maneater. You guys know that this thing, when it's flipped face up in battle, it gains control of that card that attacked it, or it attacked. Yeah, this card exists. And this card can be great fun for, it's basically a change of heart on a stick. And sometimes your opponent just doesn't play around it, and this card just ends the duel because they didn't play around it. Also, this card is a great fusion fodder for Roast Spectre of the Dun, so it works great in plant decks. Same thing with Maneater. Both of these cards are probably just going to get fused off into Roast Spectre of the Dun, and every once in a while their effect comes up and you completely slaughter your opponent because of it, and you laugh all the way to your flower pot. So, yes, pretty nice creature. Do check out Laughing Flower, especially if you're playing plants. Definitely could save a game or two for you. And next up, at number 5, we have Hourglass of Life. Now this card is one of those cards that sometimes you might play it outside of fairies, just because your deck it doesn't have enough threats, so you put this in. But a lot of times you kind of want this in fairies, where your deck is focused on building up like a couple really strong creatures, and then you can revive them with this card. This is like 4 Monster Reborns in one card. Your opponent plays a Dark Hole, you play an Hourglass of Life, your opponent attacks into it, and now you have 5 creatures. Or 4 creatures, and your opponent's really sad. Wonderful, definitely works in fairies. It can work in a lot of other things, but it's just not one of those cards that I tend to think of as wanting to put into every deck. It's one of those cards that there are certain decks that this is really strong in, and that's why it's here. And it's right in the middle of the list, so definitely a good card. It's also low deck cost, low summoning power, and it's only going to cost you 1,000 life points, so it's pretty nice. And next up we have Jiraigumo at number 4. Now, Jiraigumo, it has a nice downside of losing 100 life points every time you move it. To be honest, life points are a resource. This doesn't matter. This card probably isn't going to see much play outside of insects. But when you play this card, and some opponents' decks don't have creatures that have over 2,000 attack as base values, like, I don't know, Light Sorcerers, that just turbo out a bunch of mystical elves, this card will run over games. I will be making a Light Sorcerer deck build at some point in the future, and let me tell you that if that deck ran into a single Jiraigumo, it would lose. There is not a single thing that deck can do about this card. So this is one of the main reasons that insects are unbelievably powerful in this game, especially in the Redux mod, with some of the other cards that are coming up on this list. For 33 deck cost and 4 summoning power, you have usually it's a 2700 attack beat stick just because it's in your summoning range. A lot of times in insects you're going to be playing on a forest field. Your opponent has to have something that has over 3200 base attack, or it has to be 2700 in their summoning area, which, let me remind you, there are not many cards in this game that are actually over 3000 attack. I mean, this card gets over Blue Eyes unless it's on a mountain field. But if we're saying this thing's on a forest field, this thing is... There are very, very few cards in the game that will actually beat this card. And your opponent just super buffed a card, this takes it out. Super good. But you usually won't see it outside of insects. So, that's why it's at number 4. Next up we have Ancient Jar at number 3. This card is the entire reason that Jar Control exists. This card is also the entire reason that rocks even have a deck. They can play, I mean, you put this in the deck and the Muka Muka, and you basically have a deck. and you throw in a whole bunch of cards that just stop your opponent from moving, and spellbind them, and you have the Ancient Jar deck. This card's effect is ridiculously strong. It turns every one-turn stun effect in the game, which there's a whole lot of them, and there's a whole lot of AoE stun effects like that, with Invitation to a Dark Sleep and Swords of Revealing Light, that you just completely shut down your opponent, and they end up either having to destroy their own cards to play more cards, or they just outright lose the game. Ancient Jar is absolutely absurdly strong and has such an amazing effect, and it's just there as this card goes into a specific deck, and if you're playing that specific deck, it's amazing, and if you're not playing that deck, you don't want to see this card, so that's why it's here. Next up, we have, at number 2, we have Arsenal Bug. Man, it was a good thing that the Redux mod made this thing 7 stars instead of the 3 that it was in the base game. If you could have obtained this thing in the base game, absolutely ridiculous card. With its effect, I mean, this thing is a 4,000 attack creature, plus you're inside your insect leader range, because that's like gigantic because of extended support range. I mean, this thing without an equip is a 4,500 attack creature for 7 stars and 50 deck cost, and it takes away your opponent's terrain advantage. What an amazing card. Oh, and you can also throw this in a deck for getting free forest. It's a forest card on a stick also. Absolutely amazing card. Definitely recommend using this card in insects. It's another of the reasons that insects are so strong. There's a reason that I made that insect deck overview and said it was one of the strongest in the game. It's because insects are taking many spots on this list of the best cards in the game. Not just you can splash in the cards from the previous list and then take all of these really good cards and put them together, and they have synergy with each other, and they're just really, really good. So that's why Arsenal Bug is here. It is a really big beat stick that is really, really cheap, other than the fact that it's 7 summoning power. I mean, it's 7 summoning power, 50 deck cost. Kind of expensive to put in your deck, but insects have room for it, so that's why it's so good in insects. And last but not least, oh wait, I have an honorable mention to go through real quick. Really quick, an honorable mention goes out to Fiend Reflection number 2, just because sometimes there are very few decks that really want this card. It's not wanted in Winged Beasts, but this card in an Exodia is useful in an Exodia deck, so I wanted to just mention that it exists and probably only ever fits into an Exodia deck. But this thing is a Solomon's Law Book on a stick, so on a flip effect, so you can save it for a turn or two later when you have more summoning power, and you can just turbo through your entire deck to find your Exodia pieces. If you have like 3 of these face down, you could potentially in one turn go through the rest of your deck and play out 4 Exodia pieces in one turn and make your opponent have to kill you in one turn. So, or stop the Exodia, which is spellbinding or killing you. So, just mentioning that Fiend Reflection number 2 exists, and now we'll go back to number 1, and number 1 is Pupa of Moth. Pupa of Moth is, in my opinion, one of the strongest cards in the game. It's 2 stars to summon what is inevitably going to be a 4,000 attack creature. You just flip this thing face up, and next turn you have a perfectly ultimate Great Moth. And if your opponent kills it, you just get yourself a Great Moth, which is I mean, it's going to be a 3100 because it's in your summoning zone. Turn it onto a forest zone. I mean, this card is a 2-cost 3600 at worst. And at best, it's a 2 summoning power, 4500 attack creature. Oh, and on top of that, after you summon one of those, you can just Monster Reborn this and make another one. I just have to say, what a card. This card's amazing. It's just, for 2 stars and 25 deck cost, it just does way too much. Oh, and if you want it now, you can fuse this with a Time Wizard. So, this card is amazing. 3 of in every insect deck. And if for some reason you just needed another beat stick in your Jar Control deck or something, you could put 3 of these in there and no one's gonna... I mean, I think you're gonna have good success with that. So, definitely this card among the other insect cards is why insects are so strong. And I really, really have to say Pupa of Moth. Top tier card, and honestly it deserves number 1 on this list. So let me know if I missed any cards that you guys really liked. Let me know down below if there's any cards you wanted to see, and also go argue amongst yourselves which cards did I misplace. Thanks everyone for watching, and have a nice day.